So the West African nation of Nigeria alone accounts for more than half of Africa's missing people, and that is according to this month's report by HumAngle, a Nigerian non-profit media organization covering humanitarian issues on the ground. According to the organization, many of the people who are missing were victims of extrajudicial killings and arbitrary arrests by state security forces. Kunle Adebajo is a researcher at HumAngle, and he joins us now for more on this. Kunle, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Perhaps let's start with how the research was done.
Yes, thanks a lot for having me. At HumAngle, we spent many months researching the missing persons crisis in Nigeria. And we, first with the support of the Open Society Foundation, we tried to humanize the statistics that was domiciled in the records of the International Committee of the Red Cross. And then we started by independently gathering our own data to try to corroborate this information. And we found thousands of people in the northeastern region of Nigeria who have loved ones who have gone missing. And so the next thing we did was to try to humanize the figures by speaking to people with missing family members, just so we understand the scale of the problem and how it's affecting people on an individual level. And the latest investigation that we released was a way to answer questions as to why and how we have the problem on such a massive scale. And we found, as you rightly mentioned, cases of extrajudicial murders. We have arbitrary arrest, random profiling, cases of prolonged detention, lack of documentation of these criminal justice procedures, and also active efforts by state forces to actually cover up the wrongdoings and the human rights violations that their officers committed during those years.
You have a database of nearly 3,650 missing people in Chibok, Gwoza, Bama, and Askira Uba areas of northern Nigeria. What is the story behind them going missing?
Yes, so what usually happens, a lot of these incidents took place somewhere between 2012 and 2016. And so when number one, there's the case of arbitrary arrest by military personnel when people are displaced from their communities. Men who appear young, who fit the profile of insurgents in the country, are usually arrested in mass, hundreds of them at the same time, and then they are dumped at detention facilities. Usually when this happens, they are not given access to lawyers, they are not allowed to communicate to their families, and so the family members have no way to ascertain what has happened to them. It's basically a case of enforced disappearance. And the only way they learn of what happened is from people when they are released occasionally. They then say, oh, this person was also in the cell with us and he is alive or he is dead or he's been transferred and so on. But there's summary executions, extrajudicial killings, where people are taken to remote parts of communities and then just killed and buried in mass graves. Especially in 2014, there was a case that Amnesty International itself also documented of over 600 people, some really killed after terrorists broke people out of a particular city. And so there's just massive human rights violations over the years. And so what we did was to document how these things have happened, from the arrest to the detention, to what happens when they are in the detention facility, to how people are killed, to how the dead bodies are taken to the hospital, how some of them are taken directly to the graves, or how people are just dumped even without any form of interment taking place. And then what happens after the burial has been done. We talk to people at the hospital. We talk to people who were in charge of digging and burying the bodies. We talk to the families and the loved ones of the victims. We talk to various actors in that process just to understand exactly what has taken place on the scale of it.
How should we understand this? Because you mentioned the word terrorist, and the north of Nigeria in particular is facing a serious issue of insecurity. And so you've got the army allegedly committing these acts. And then you've got the issue of terrorists and insurgents, for lack of a better expression, in the north of Nigeria. So how should we then understand this, especially when people go missing?
Yes, so there's lots of factors involved. Nigeria has faced issues of terrorism since 2009 when the Boko Haram insurgency broke out in Borno State in the northeast of the country, around the Lake Chad region. And so when we say over 25,000 people have gone missing, a lot of that is as a result of abductions, kidnappings, attacks by terrorists belonging to Boko Haram or Islamic State affiliated groups within the country. And so what we now find is that it's not just the terrorists who have contributed to this menace. It's also significantly due to the actions and inaction of state authorities. And we exclusively documented cases of over 300 people being taken from a detention facility known as Giwa Barracks to the hospital mortuary in the state of Borno. That is a huge number. And then there's still hundreds of other people who did not even make it to that mortuary, who were just simply taken to mass graves and dumped in different parts of the state. Sources pointed out about 15 sites where these dead bodies were taken to, and we confirmed using satellite analysis that many of these places show signs of mass burials. And in some other places we actually found satellite images showing piles of dead bodies, and then after which we found fresh grave sites following the disappearance of those piles.
Nigeria has a Human Rights Commission, Kunle. Has this been brought to their attention?
Oh yes, absolutely. They are aware, and they've been making promises over the years that they would launch a national missing persons register. But even though they've been making these promises as far back as 2015, 2016, we've not seen concrete steps being taken in that direction. We've not actually seen a publicly accessible register yet. The last time I spoke to officers of the commission, they mentioned that it's still at the pilot stage where they are speaking to affected families in Borno State before they replicate the same efforts across the country. But we think if there's a political will, there's really nothing stopping the government from, besides even establishing the national register, also creating mechanisms for families with different sorts of grievances to voice their grievances and to get compensation, to get justice in different forms that will be satisfactory to them. But those conversations are not taking place yet.
Thank you very much, Kunle Adebajo, researcher at HumAngle, a non-profit media organization in Nigeria, joining us from Abuja.